Benadryl, also known as diphenhydramine, an over-the-counter medication that's mainly used to treat allergies, though can also be used for insomnia, nausea, and the common cold. The medicine is probably most known in pill form, and it's very likely you have it in your home as of right now, since it's a very common medication. But there is a very dark side to this common house drug, where it can induce hallucinations such as these. You see, the allergy pill you have in your home is actually, in all secrecy, a delirium, known for being much like a hallucinogenic, the same way it produces solid hallucinations, but meanwhile puts you in a state of delirium, which is a much known side effect for people who suddenly stop drinking or have an alcohol abuse. Now, what exactly happens on a drug like this? What do the person experience, and what's it like? I reckon that's what y'all are interested in. Well, let me tell you, it is not fun. This video is just to show how dangerous a drug like this can be, especially since it has been a trend at some point. Therefore, I do feel like it's important to inform people of the dangers of this. And also at the ending, there is a tale that depicts how bad it is to fall victim to the consumption of this recreational drug. The different levels of Benadryl. Before diving into the different levels, I want to give a thanks to the Reddit user The Hull for creating this list and being one of my main sources for information about this world. His DPH guide post I have linked in the description so you can check it out, and yeah, it's a pretty interesting read. Going through the different levels, you will hear some of the side effects that this drug can induce and what it's like being on therapeutic level. This level is probably just going to make you sleepy and cure your allergies temporarily. If you can stay up at the higher end, you might get a tiny bit of body high and mental slowdown. Level 1. This is known as a FAP dose. There might be slight music enhancement and you'll get a tiny bit of that DPH body heaviness, but most people take this amount so their orgasms are enhanced. But doing anything sexual on DPH have been reported to giving people some degree of sexual dysfunction after doing this a few times, with one notable 20-year-old developing full-on erectile dysfunction as a near total loss of penis function after abusing DPH for a year. Level 2. Music sounds great. Your mouth is going to be so fucking dry and you're gonna have to piss a lot. However, for a lot of people they are unable to urinate on DPH, or it at least becomes very difficult. Your body feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds. You might start seeing slight movement in the corner of your eyes or occasionally see a spider where there is no spider. You'll probably experience auditory hallucinations like a family member calling your name from the distance or faint footsteps outside your door. Mentally, your short-term memory is going to start to go to hell and you won't be able to keep a thought going very long. Some people get closed-eyed visuals at this level, which are usually short, nonsensical and very abstract visions, which usually are influenced by the music listening to. Level 2, continued. This is the dosage level between the higher I described before and full-blown delirium. The positive effects will get a bit stronger, especially the confusion, but many others have also explained the negative effects to get much worse, far outweighing the positives. Hallucinations, especially auditory, become much more common, but you still have some ability to differentiate them from reality. Level 3, delirium. Delirium begins to set in. You will probably forget you took anything and you will have full lifelike hallucinations. Your parents or the police might come in and harass you for taking drugs. You will see spiders or snakes all over the place. You might text your friend or grab a remote to change the channel and then see your phone/remote evaporate immediately. Your friends will probably come over and hang out with you for a little bit, probably telling you all about very strange, twisted things. Strangely, emotions are usually dulled quite a bit, so something that would usually terrify you or at least gross you out won't really have any effect on you. Negative effects wise, they kinda stop mattering at this point, since your brain is so wonky, you probably won't even pay attention to them. People should also hide keys and their phones from themselves. Another thing that might be a good idea to hide would be the leftover DPH pills, since you while tripping might remember that you wanted to trip on DPH tonight and redose, which could potentially have fatal consequences at this level. Once you are delirious, you will have almost no real control over your actions. The experience is very similar to a dream. Everything you do will make perfect sense at the time. Unlike a dream, however, you have to deal with any bad decisions that results from this. Level 4, better known as Irreal. Irreal is characterized by almost complete disconnection from reality. Often people at this level will spend hours walking around, talking to people, swatting phantom bugs, then blink and realize that they've just been standing in one spot, and everything that just occurred was a fantasy. Hallucinations at this level tend to become more hellish, with disturbing, often violent imagery commonly occurring. You may genuinely develop PTSD if you survive a dose of this size. Shadow people, including the Hatman, are almost always present as well. This level is objectively terrible for your mental and physical health. Seizures are not uncommon, and a high risk of death or serious health complications, including stroke and heart attacks, is present. Reading from OP's POV now. I dosed this high one time in a suicide attempt, but I do not remember much of the trip at all, as I believe I spent a lot of it seizing. I have few memories of the trip, which I don't think are entirely fabricated. One is of being in a cave, throwing a torch at a cave demon, and then realizing that I was in my hallway and I had thrown my phone at my dog. Another is a general feeling of being chased by something with teeth. The most horrific one was seeing my entire family, as well as most of my friends and co-workers, crucified and bleeding on my front lawn, and screaming at me for doing this to them. The experience, combined with my previous use of the substance, left me with severe, hallucinogenic, persisting perception disorder, worsened my depression and caused momentary flashbacks to the delirious state for months after it happened. Yes, people. Crazy stuff. Now, why is this level called Irreal? Well, let me tell you one of the most hellish stories ever where the term was first coined. The story of Sedric Lightbury. You see, Sedric Lightbury, aka the hero of /del/ is or was a 420chan user who had two famous TPH trip reports, where he took close to a lethal amount of TPH, last one landing him in the hospital with life-lasting effects. Where he is today, no one knows, but let me tell you the stories of where the name Irreal first came from. First post. Before you ask me, I'm not trying to be an hero, but I do wish to get as close to death as possible. Doors are locked, phone is off, wish me luck. Let's see how this goes, shall we? Suicide or just having tea with death? Tea with death is what I'm aiming for. Holy fucking fuck. I'm alive. I have never appreciated that fact more than I do now. Fuck. Still having some visual distortions. I'm feeling sick, but mostly down. Before I start the trip report, I should warn you kids not to do this much TPH, no matter what. I did it. I've seen it. You don't have to follow my stupidity. You don't want to go there. Trust me, daddy. So, about 30 minutes after taking the pills, I started feeling heavy. The feeling was getting increasingly stronger. I tried my best to keep my mind blank, but failed. It started freaking out after gaining approximately 400 pounds and having my ears ring so badly I couldn't hear anything else, including my own voice when I tried talking. Then for a short moment, my vision went blank and white, then flashed back to normal again. After this, the ringing began to go away, and after it was gone, the visuals kicked in. Hardcore. First thing I remember, my ceiling, walls and floor were melting, and I was being pulled down by an enormous force. However, moving wasn't too difficult. After a bit of trying, every shadow in my room was crawling with insects, apart from a big juicy taco right above my head. There was a cluster of centipedes on the floor, and some of them were running around the table. They wouldn't go away when touched. The longer I stared, the more of them would appear, until I wasn't in my room anymore. Everything around me was a moving, living mess. I don't remember what else happened in this stage or how I escaped it, but after it went away, some inanimate objects appeared to be breathing and I was afraid to touch them. I had an extremely dry mouth, so I got up and went to get myself a glass of water. It didn't help much, but I drank a lot anyway. After finishing the third glass, I heard music coming from the other room, so I went to check it out. First thing I noticed, there was a human-sized creature standing in the corner. I assumed it was a doll. It would lose its parts, arms, legs, head, from time to time, but as soon as I looked away and looked back again, it was whole again. I was afraid to touch it because I was sure it would hurt me. The doll stayed in that corner, disassembling and assembling itself again and again during this whole stage of the trip. Second thing I noticed, there was a man dressed in black, his head buried in shadows sitting on the sofa, and several other people/creatures wandering around, then fading later. Not all of them went away though. Some shadow figures got more human-like in time, and I had some conversations with who I thought were my friends. Everything was extremely realistic. I could touch, hear and smell them, but after a while most of them went away. But the dark man on the sofa stayed where he was. So I went up to him and sat down as well. I couldn't see his face, but didn't pay much attention then. I believe this, my friends, was the headman himself. All the interaction we had was a handshake and a bit of talking. I said hi to him and he said,
"Hello, Sedric."
back. Then I asked if I was going to die. He was quiet for a while, then said,
"Don't go to Iriel."
After those words, there was a sudden flash of light and I found myself standing in the kitchen with a broken glass on the floor. I went to check the room I was meant to be at. Nothing was there. Suddenly I felt that the message I got was very important and I had to tell others. So I went back to my room, to my computer, and tried to post the phrase on this thread, only to find out I was standing at the other side of the room, facing the wall later. Then I would go back to the computer and repeat what I did, but it would always end the same. I was stuck in a loop. This was extremely terrifying. I think nothing during this trip scared me as much as the thought of being stuck in that loop forever. After this repeated about 6 times, I sent, "Am I actually typing this?" which surprisingly got through. I was extremely relieved. Then another flash followed, and I would hear people knocking at my door. I would go and let them in. We talked then. One of the guests turned out to be my father, which is dead. I repeat, everything I saw and heard was extremely realistic, and I took it as reality. I was paralyzed by horror for a moment when I realized I was dead. It was so clear now. I took too much TPH, too much to come back from where it took me. I asked my father if I was dead. He said no. Then I asked how can I be here with him, and he answered, "If you can be, you are not dead." We mostly just sat together quietly ignoring the others. They were going on with their own conversations when a young dark-haired man came up to me and offered me a cigarette. I took it and smoked it for a bit. It would always become a new, freshly lit one after taking my attention off it for a while. Suddenly the room went silent. I looked around to see what was up. Everyone was gone. My room window was covered with moths. I figured the people in my room were those moths from the very beginning. After yet another flash, I was laying on my floor with a Sahara Desert for a mouth and a mild headache. I managed to go and lay down on the bed. There are many blackouts from this point. Basically all I can remember are whispers, "Don't go to Iriel," repeating from time to time. I realized I was the one saying that. Tacos crawling on my sheets and visual distortions of the room. My thoughts wouldn't stop bothering me. I thought I could hear screaming. I felt heavy and sick. I probably fell asleep at some point, but I have no clue what I did beforehand because there are just way too many gaps and no one to tell the story from a different angle. My faith in humanity completely restored. So, a pretty interesting trip report, but the second story is even crazier. Traveling to Iriel and back. I went to hell and back to be able to tell you this. Don't do it. Just don't. Unless you want to end up in the hospital while being threatened by your inner demons and feeling an almost unbearable pain in your chest, thinking you could die any second. Still dealing with minor weakness, but it probably won't go away for a while. July the 12th. After around 20 minutes of consuming the pills, I started to see mild distortions and audio hallucinations. Mostly ticking and scratching, which seemed distant. I was inside the car which was going to the house I was supposed to spend my trip at. And I kept telling Martin, my friend, not to interfere with the trip in any way, unless it was obvious I'm in lethal danger. I noticed my memory span was becoming short, and the ticking and scratching was getting louder, along with a mild head rush, like high-pitched sound. Right before we reached his place, I realized I couldn't move, and my vision started glitching up. It kept flashing and freezing, and sometimes I wouldn't see anything at all for a split second. I told this to Martin and he convinced me I could walk. Just had to do it carefully, so I followed him to the house. I was very, very heavy, and every time I looked at the floor, it seemed like my feet were sinking into it. I was left alone in the room, which was slowly melting, and most of the furniture had bright, unusual outlines. At this point, I felt crawling all over me. Vision flashed again, and then I found myself completely covered in spiderwebs. Moving my hands through them helped for a little while. Hands would go through them and they'd fade, but the webs came back almost immediately. I could feel the sticky sensation on my skin, which made them seem just as real as I was. Then there was a loud knock at the window. I turned around to see someone standing behind it, so I opened it. I heard music coming from the outside. It was different from what I heard during my last trip, but strangely familiar and similar to it. "Let's go, Sedric," said the creature, and I climbed out the window without much consideration. It was extremely hard to walk. The grass and the trees seemed grainy, and it looked like they were moving, crawling, breathing, and living. My sense of time was severely distorted. Few steps would feel like an eternity, or I would black out and confuse fairly long periods of time for a second. We were going towards the music, the creature walking few steps ahead of me. After a while I started noticing lights, probably torches, among trees, and hundreds of moths around them. The air was full of moths, and they would land on me and fly around. I tried my best to keep them out of my face, failing miserably. Finally we reached a clearing. There were many people there. At the front, very still, stood my relatives, all dressed in black, surrounded by shadows and people I don't know. They all seemed frozen and had the same blank expression on their faces, eyes fixed on me. I tried to talk, but my voice got stuck in my throat. It was extremely sore and dry. I started feeling a mixture of guilt and fear, because I could tell they all knew the creature took me here because of the DPH, and considering most of them were dead, I wasn't sure if I was still alive. Suddenly there was a very unpleasant crackling sound, and a white flash. The creature who took me here was gone now, and everyone was just walking around and talking, completely ignoring me. I decided to sit because of the heaviness. After a while I noticed a black dot moving through the grass towards me, very quickly, with the corner of my eye. Then I would feel a bulge moving under my shirt at the right shoulder. I freaked out and smacked it, and a black rat fell out of my sleeve. It looked dead, but every time I took my attention off it, it would disappear and run/hide under my shirt again. I was really scared of it for some reason, and after around 5 loops of this, I started beating it repeatedly after it dropped out of my sleep, until the rat's body turned into some sort of rubber goo. Its legs were still moving after this. It wouldn't touch me again, but I kept seeing its distorted body with the trembling legs from time to time. I quickly stood up and went to a different spot. I was approached by my mother. She was crying. "Why did you do this, Sedric? We warned you." I told her not to worry and that I was going to be fine. Bullshit. Other people froze again, and I could hear voices saying, "We warned you. And what have you done?" even though their lips weren't moving. The longer I looked at them, the more distorted they would get, until they had bug eyes and arms reaching the ground. Another flash followed. I was back at the front yard of the house, and saw Martin standing by me. I assumed he shook me. He asked if I was alright and that I've been standing here for ages. He had spiders in his hair. I tried to say yes, but I couldn't because my mouth was painfully dry. I walked my way to the house. Martin told me I never went there in the first place. The whole trip thus far has been experienced right after getting out of the car, standing/moving around at that spot. There are many blackouts at this point. I recall centipedes from my last trip, spiders all over me and inside me. Around 10 of them crawled out of my mouth. July 13th. I woke up, still tripping hard. Never remembered falling asleep. I went to check the next room. Martin told me I was out for around 5 hours. Later I found out he was still asleep and the information was false. I managed to get some water and go to the bathroom because the urge to pee was terrible. Moving was still a difficult task and I couldn't concentrate properly. This is when I posted alive. When I got back to the living room, I saw someone sitting on the couch. It stood up and I recognized the figure as the headman. He walked towards me and said, "You're getting in," and running out. I started to feel extremely hazy and got another head rush. I'm not sure if I left the sofa or blacked out and laid down on it, but I was there, at the edge of sleep, and the headman was looking right at me. This might be a dream or a full-blown trip. I don't remember closing my eyes, and I could still feel my surroundings. I was in an extremely vast room. The floor, ceiling and walls were black. There were no doors and I couldn't see where it ended because darkness hid it out of sight. There was a woman standing right in front of me. She looked at me, smiled and took her face off as it was a mask. The face behind it looked exactly the same, but she was bleeding from her eyes. Mouth and nose and her eyes were completely black. I looked around the room to see faces appearing on the walls and ceiling, greeting me without words, until they started to fall down like masks too, revealing bruised and blood-covered faces. The masks would turn into ash that wouldn't settle, but move around the floor and feet. That's all I can remember from this stage of the trip. After snapping out of this, I laid there for a while, feeling my heart beat rapidly. The headman was gone. My hallucinations were mostly audible now. I heard lots of incomprehensible whispers and quiet singing. I posted on this thread again and decided to go to sleep for real. I was so very tired. This time I drifted into deep sleep. After a while, I realized I was sleeping. My vision was completely black until a room began to appear. It was small and grey, its door open, displaying nothingness. I walked towards the door and stepped out of the room. Several shadows approached me. The door shut and I heard,
"You are out."
very clearly. Then I felt a burning pain at my chest. Martin said I started screaming. He tried to wake me up and checked my pulse. Then he realized what was happening and called an ambulance. I had to down a lot of charcoal. Minor hallucinations for around 3 days. Fuck. Yeah. Man died and came back to life. Fucking crazy. So there are some interesting things to note about these stories in my opinion. One is the word irreal. The fact it's almost pronounced like the French word irreal, which means unreal. Also, I can't help but think there's something interesting about meeting dead people and angels, and Sedric meeting the headman, mentioning another realm called irreal. Also, the fact that many people see the headman as a ghost or in sleep paralysis and nightmares. Like, why does he exist in all people's subconsciousness and come forward on TPH? And also, how does his imagination just create a word describing another realm like it's a known thing? Irreal. Like, where did his imagination get that from? Of course it could be fabricated, yes, but I can't help but feel like maybe there's some truth to the pretty famous theory of states like these connecting you to some upper form of reality or other shit. But it's probably just because you are crazy delirious out of your mind that there gets created all this crazy stuff that makes no sense. But nonetheless, it's interesting stuff to analyze in my opinion. The scariest thing about Benadryl. I think these two stories does a good job at letting you know this is not a thing to be messed with. But sadly, the scariest thing about it isn't even the fact that you experienced the most horrific and scary experience of your life. No, but the fact that this drug is addictive. Yes, you heard me right. This drug is highly addictive, and basically you become addicted to experiencing something horrible. And if you don't do it, you feel horrible. You see, at least with other dangerous and scary drugs, you at least feel good on them. But this one, you don't even feel good on it. You're literally in hell, then you come back and feel like hell, and jump straight back into hell. It's an eternal ring of fire to get stuck in, which, in my opinion, crowns it as possibly the scariest drug of all time. And if not that, than the scariest in your home. But what's, yes, crazy enough, maybe scarier, or the saddest thing about this is the fact that a lot of these people, it seems, have fallen victim not because of them wanting to have fun, but actually doctors recommending it. A great Reddit story I'll link in the description, which is definitely worth a read, but some of it I'll just read out to you now, since it's definitely worth a read. The discovery of this sub is absolutely heartbreaking to me. I genuinely had no idea people use TPH to try to get a high, and it is so concerning the amount of literal kids that are on this sub using or looking to use TPH recreationally. I'd like to share my experience with TPH with the hopes that one person read it and decide against abusing TPH. When I was 19, I experienced some trauma that led to severe mental decline. I stopped eating, showering, talking, but my biggest struggle was I stopped sleeping. No matter how hard I tried, my brain would not allow me to fall asleep, and I stayed awake for days until my body would collapse and my brain would force a restart. Under the supervision of medical professionals, I tried everything under the sun to help me sleep. Melatonin, teas and tinctures, Ambien, Trazodone, Ativan, Clonopin, the list goes on. Nothing worked without horrible side effects that were just as impossible to live with as the insomnia itself, leading to effects such as auditory and visual hallucinations, hair loss, sleep paralysis, sleepwalking, skin rashes, nosebleeds, etc. A few months into trying and failing to find a medication that worked, I was told about TPH. I tried it, it worked with little to no unwanted side effects, and so I decided that it was my best bet. It just seemed like the lesser evil in comparison to prescription meds. Like, it's just Benadryl, right? It was over the counter, available at most grocery stores, affordable, and it put me to sleep, which is what I desperately needed. So that's what I did. The original plan was to get myself to a point where my body was retrained to sleep on its own, and I was in a more stable mental state, and then I'd come off the TPH. I started at the recommended dose, and for a while it worked. I'd wake up groggy most mornings, but I was sleeping and going to therapy, and so it was worth it. By the end of the year, I felt I was finally in a good place and ready to stop taking the meds, but every time I tried, I just could not sleep without it, no matter how exhausted I was. So I continued to take it. After this, he details how the drug afterwards dragged him down in hell and how terrible his life is, all because of a recommendation supposed to fix his mental problems. I'm not saying you shouldn't trust your doctor or if they tell you to use it if you have allergy or suffer from insomnia or other, just beware, because clearly people's lives have been destroyed because of it, which is just crazy to me. At last, why did I want to speak about this drug? Well, you see, it have actually been a trend on social medias named the Benadryl challenge.
Go challenge! Mama!
I don't know if it is anymore, but if you hear about it through influencers who have tried it and talk greatly about it, or generally just other people on social media, turn around while you can, since there's actually been teens who have died from doing this challenge and ended up in the hospital in coma and ventilator, all because of a challenge on TikTok. So yeah, shit's crazy. Beware, kids. Anyways, I don't like ending on a bad note, so let me spread some positivity. You see, I found this crazy rabbit hole through a random commenter on an artist post I fairly like. His Instagram is 914 New York. Not sponsored it anyway, by the way, I just like showing support to artists I like. I believe I found him through some sicko artwork and really liked what he did with mixing fonts and brushes. Then on one post a guy was like, "This reminds me of Benadryl." And yeah, I stumbled upon this video of a rabbit hole and thought I ought to spread some awareness to this shit. Anyways, thank you for watching and remember to show love.
I'm dreaming